do that. But thank you, everyone, and welcome to MPHA's Policymaker Town Hall on how we can use the Maine Climate Action Plan to improve transportation infrastructure, reduce emissions, and better the environment and enhance public health. My name is Heather Drake, and I'm Maine Public Health Association's membership manager. I'd really like to thank you all for being here this morning, especially during what is a busy time for so many of you. I'd also like to thank the members of MPHA's Climate Member Section for helping to organize today's event, and our panelists for taking time from their busy schedules to present. And as I said, we are recording this morning's town hall. So just as an FYI there, we'll make it accessible and send it out via email afterward. Maine Public Health Association is holding this town hall to highlight the strategies within the Maine Climate Action Plan that will work to improve transportation infrastructure and reduce emissions, which will slow climate change and improve public health. Our panelists today will speak about these connections and what is happening within their own organizations to work toward the goals in the Climate Action Plan. As many of you may be aware and as outlined in the plan, transportation is responsible for over half of Maine's greenhouse gas emissions, which contribute to climate change and poor health outcomes. And just this morning, I was reading how globally emissions are back on the rise after dropping this past year. Disruptions to our climate systems negatively impact public health and can be seen through increases in tick and mosquito-borne disease and food and waterborne infections. The emissions pollute the air we breathe, leading to an increase in poor air quality days and exacerbate health conditions such as asthma and other lung diseases. Negative impacts on our environment and thus the public's health disproportionately impact communities of color and of lower incomes, making climate change not only an environmental issue, but an environmental justice issue as well, calling for equitable policy solutions. We're very excited and thankful to hear from this morning's panel about the work they're doing and policy solutions to curtail climate change through transportation and improving public health. I would like to share our agenda for this morning. Get that pulled up and introduce our speakers. There's so many buttons to click. So, welcome, I did that already. On our panel today, we have Joyce Taylor, who will start things off. She's the co-chair of Maine Climate Council's Transportation Working Group. She will be followed by Jack McKay, the Director of Food and Medicine, Sara Mills-Knapp, the Sustainability Program Manager for the Greatland-Portland Council of Governments, Jean Sideris, Executive Director of the Bicycle Coalition of Maine, and Todd Martin, the Grassroots Outreach Coordinator for the Natural Resources Council of Maine. We'll close up the panel with some policy solutions, and then we'll leave plenty of time for questions and answers. If you have questions, please feel free to enter them throughout the chat as we go. And we'll be sure to get those answered at the end, and any we don't get to, we'll try to follow up with it as best as we can. I think that's it for housekeeping. Again, thank you all for being here, and Joyce, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Heather. I am Joyce Taylor. I'm also the Chief Engineer of the Maine Department of Transportation, and as Heather said, the co-chair of the Climate Council's Transportation Working Group. So I wanted to just kind of run through some of the strategies and maybe kind of point out some health benefits, as well as talk about what DOT is going to be doing and others. So one of the biggest strategies, it's really clear to meet the governor's goals that she's put forward from the Climate Council. We have to really have a strong electric fleet. We have to turn our light duty vehicles over to become electric, and really look at also medium and heavy, but the light vehicle fleet is really important. And obviously, the more we can electrify the fleet, the better our air will be and less air pollution. The good news is that many manufacturers are coming online and saying that they plan to go all electric sometime around 2030, 35. California, Washington, Mass, a lot of states are actually adopting rules saying that you're not going to be able to buy, to sell a new internal combustion engine after 2035 or 2030. So that's going to help. There's also some synergy with autonomous vehicle technology. It really does work better with electric vehicles. So our goal is to try to get, get people to start to even buy used EVs. And we have been working with Efficiency Maine, which has updated its rebate program to include rebates for used EVs, and they've come up with a better rebate for low-income folks. And so we've really been looking at the equity lens. DOT actually hired University of Maine, Jonathan Rubin, who's on the subcommittee for equity under the Climate Council, to really look at equity in terms of electrification and how are we going to help people of low income get into these electric vehicles. So that's a report that should be coming out in another month or so. We're also looking at one of the strategies is less vehicle miles traveled. Right during the beginning of the pandemic, travel dropped dramatically. It's back up. It's only, I think this week it's down like 8%. So we've been measuring it every week, and it's somewhere between 4 to 10% down. So it's coming back. And yet when I look at one of these calls, most people are still home. So what's going on? And that's something that we're going to really have to figure out how people are traveling and why. But in the meantime, there's a couple initiatives that DOT is looking at. One is, really looking at safe and walkable village areas, and how do we encourage people to walk and to bike and but what we do know is they need to feel safe. And so at DOT, we're really looking at this issue and really addressing sidewalk issues where we can, and taking a harder look at what is really what is the right thing to do in terms of encouraging walking and biking. We are also taking over what's called Go Maine. It's the ride sharing program. It's been at the Turnpike, and it's been mostly Southern Maine oriented, and we're going to take it back and really launch it in 2022. Really try to get people to want to ride share, and to see if we can make it easier to have apps and to be able to have it more on demand as well. And DOT is also going to be putting out a strategic vision for transit, and what does transit look like in Maine, in particular rural Maine, and is there synergy between things that DHHS is doing in terms of getting people to recovery, to health appointments. Are there ways that we can both merge some of our health issues and getting people to where they need to go to get care, but yet have ride sharing, have people in electric vans? What does rural transit look like in the future? And that's an equity issue, as you all know. So that's something that we're looking at and trying to find those synergies with other issues. So one of the other strategies is to get folks into more efficient vehicles. Again, less greenhouse gas emissions, less pollution, and trying to look at how do we do that. That's another thing Maine has been looking at for us. One of the things that's kind of clear is that, if you have a truck today, and trucks are the #1 vehicle in the state with SUVs, someone's not necessarily going to jump into a Prius. They want to be in a truck or an SUV. So how do we help convince them to go to a higher efficiency vehicle? And so those are some of the things that we're looking at. But I think really the focus for DOT is to really, one, lead by example and start electrifying our fleet. And we've started that. We've bought an electric car. We've got a charging station at every one of our regional offices and headquarters now. And then again, just to reemphasize, really looking at, walkable, bikeable Maine, and having people feel safe enough to do those activities, which obviously from a physical activity point of view is a real benefit. And then just looking at how do we convince people to drive less or to ride share. So that's really high level, but I think I've taken my 5 minutes, so I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Joyce. And Jack, I will put it right over to you.
Great, thank you. So I work at Food and Medicine. We've been around for 19 years now. We work on issues related to people choosing between food, medicine, and other basic necessities. Public transportation. Transportation is one of those necessities that people really need to engage in life. And we've been working on public transportation in Eastern Maine for about 10 years. So I think, you know, historically, there's been a real misbalance of funding for auto versus public transportation. As one, you know, large example, the Federal Highway Trust since 1982, and thanks to an agreement by then President Ronald Reagan, provides 80% of its funding goes to highways with only 20% for public transportation. And then Maine itself is really an outlier when it comes to funding for public transportation. We rank 38th. We spend 82 cents per capita for public transportation, whereas Vermont, which is, you know, sort of on the other end of the spectrum, spends $12.22 per capita. So those are pretty shocking disparities, and it really affects people who need public transportation. The goal of this group, as I understand it, is to bring it up to $5 per capita, and that would be a dramatic benefit in a number of different areas, which I'll talk about in a minute. As we've heard already, you know, climate change is very affected by transportation. And according to the Federal Transit Administration, a mile traveled by bus versus car contributes a third less CO2 into the atmosphere. So there's significant, within transportation, which is a great cause of climate change, as we heard earlier, 50% in Maine. Traveling by bus versus car is a very significant difference. You know, all the particulates, you know, that we've heard earlier in terms of contributing to the rate of asthma. Maine has is tied at the worst rate for asthma. So I think the thing that I really want to focus, though, is on the equity issue. You know, the health is quite, you know, apparent, I think, in terms of, you know, people who aren't able to get out. 30% of people don't drive, either due to age, cost of ownership, or disability. So folks who, you know, in the Bangor region, the community connector, which covers Bangor, Brewer, Orono, VZ, Old Town, it doesn't operate on Sundays. It doesn't operate after 6 p.m. And so if folks are unable to get out, they can't shop, they can't visit friends, they can't go to doctor's appointments, they can't really function in life. And that has a real health impact. It has a quality of life impact, and it disproportionately impacts low-income folks. And again, these aren't small numbers. 40,892 households do not own a car. So nearly 50,000 households do not have a car. And in addition, the high costs of transportation for most folks force people on limited budgets to move further outside of town into rural areas to a place where they can afford, but then they transfer those, you know, savings of lower home ownership or rental ownership to a car. And so they're more dependent on a car. So increasing public transportation in our more urban areas, as well as promoting linkages between our public systems within the urban areas to suburban areas is you know, clearly, you know, is very much of a good thing. I'm very interested in Senator Maximum's bill to provide rural non-medical transportation services to elderly and adults with disabilities receive home and community benefits under the Maine Care program. I think we need more creative ways to create those linkages. And I think, you know, one of the things that I was reflecting on before I agreed to do this presentation is just, you know, if there is funding, if we increase from 82 cents per capita to $5 per capita, is there the need for it? Will it be spent? Do people want it? And I think looking, you know, our biggest focus has been in the Bangor region. And a year ago, the city of Bangor made a huge decision, which was, you know, not an easy one to do, to dedicate I wouldn't call it our crown jewel, but it's certainly a very, very important piece, Pickering Square in downtown Bangor, which a number of developers had really slated. It's right in the city center, had really slated for economic development along the line of more high-end restaurants and the like. We don't have a lot of undeveloped places like that. And so there's a real question, is this going to be used, this space, is this going to be used for this type of development, or is it going to be used for the community connector? And this issue had been sort of, bounced around for 17 years. And this past January, a year ago, so 13 months ago, the city decided to commit to public transportation. So Bangor is committing in a pretty big way, and this region to public transportation. The city initiated a study to work on ways to improve the system. We've got 7 new buses coming this year and 3 new ADA paratransit vans. We're changing our system to a flag stop, which is pretty antiquated, to a designated stop. There's new technology coming. So again, I think that there's a real demand. There's a commitment from Bangor, and I'm sure there's I understand there's interest around the state for public transportation if we can get the funding for it. And I urge that to happen. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jack, and we'll take it over to Sara. Let me just pull up your slides.
Thank you. Great. Thanks for having me here today. So the Greater Portland Council of Governments is really focused on helping to support the strategies that were outlined in the State Climate Action Plan and the Regional Climate Action Plan that Portland and South Portland has put out. You can go to the next slide. So as we've talked about here, transportation is really the sort of lion's share of the emissions in Maine, and GPCOG being, a regional planning organization and the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and working with PACs, we are really focused on transportation and land use planning in these areas. So transportation is really, in reducing emissions in transportation is a big focus of ours. You can go to the next slide. And obviously we've talked a lot about the intersection of public health and climate change, and being in a more urban part of Maine, it definitely is something that we are engaged in. Air pollution and working with DEP and others is very important. So just to highlight that, next slide. I'll just go through these few slides quickly and then get into what our work is. So, the strategies of scaling up electrification and reducing vehicle miles traveled really fit well within the work that we do. And we really see electrification obviously as being key, especially in the short term. Maine's grid is very clean. And so it's a really productive and quick way to reduce emissions. You can go to the next slide. So just to kind of dive into the EV question a little bit, this is a map of the existing EV charging in Maine, which there's about 207 stations, and you can see they're pretty well sort of focused in southern Maine, although we're getting a better geographical spread recently. So to scale up, and here it says also we have about 4,000 EVs in Maine. And this is also, as you can see, sort of with the trends, is increasing quickly, which is exciting. But to scale up to 40,000, that's obviously by 2025 is obviously a big charge. In order to do that, we would need to scale up charging infrastructure greatly and improve the sort of geographic spread of it as well. So that's something that I think it's good to kind of see a vision of what the challenge is. And it's not insurmountable. I think we feel like there's obviously states who have done this just as quickly, and I think that we can meet this challenge as well, because we have the technology, and it's just really a matter of executing. So go to the next slide. So the strategies and targets that GPCOG is supporting around scaling up electrification of vehicles. We work both to support, scaling up of light duty vehicles, but also to encourage the adoption of hybrid and alternative fuel medium and heavy duty vehicles. And we've been working obviously closely with our public transit partners on transit buses. We would like to support electrification of school buses more in the state. And Casco Bay has an electric hybrid propulsion boat coming, which is very exciting. So I think there's a lot happening. And this year, we'd really like to focus more on education and doing maybe some demo trucks or some activity with medium and heavy duty vehicles to kind of show that technology is coming quickly and is already being adopted in lots of states. In terms of reducing vehicle miles traveled, GPCOG really works a lot on land use policies and encouraging smart growth, encouraging more dense town villages and centers, and improving pedestrian and bike infrastructure as well. We have a large broadband initiative to improve access to broadband, which further supports reducing vehicle miles traveled to improve people's abilities to work from home. And obviously public transit. Move on to the next one. So these are our programs that GPCOG has that in which we sort of work on these strategies. Maine Clean Communities is a federally supported program, so we're tied into a national coalition of other clean community programs, and our focus is on reducing dependence on fuel and looking at alternative fuels and electric vehicles. We do technical assistance to municipal fleets and other types of private sector fleets to try and support moving to EVs. We convene a network of local, regional, and national partners through Drive Electric Maine, which has quarterly meetings. And we're hoping through that stakeholder group that we can really be a support to the state as they're developing their clean transportation roadmap and looking at what types of policies, incentives, infrastructure, et cetera, that needs to be established in order to meet their electrification goal. We also do lots of educational activities and webinars and that kind of thing to support and provide, try and provide lessons learned from across the country as well in those areas. So GPCOG also has a sustainability services, which my team runs, and our goal right now is to really support municipalities in the region to kind of capture the momentum that the state and regional climate action plans have established and the strong foundation of data to get municipalities, smaller municipalities engaged in climate action planning and starting to see what municipalities can do to support the kind of both short-term quick win stuff and longer-term climate action planning that is being done. So we're convening regional discussions and doing some direct technical support to municipalities to improve their climate action planning capacity. And so GPCOG also does a lot of community and regional planning. We work a lot on comprehensive plans with our various municipality member municipalities. And we focus a lot, like I said, on density and growing the region in a way that does not consume open space, supporting land use policies to reduce vehicle miles traveled, focusing on creating walkable and bikeable communities, and using long-range transit planning to make public transit a competitive choice for getting around. You can go to the next slide. So here's some key activities we're working on this year. We're developing a municipal EV toolkit to help municipalities understand how they can use planning, codes, regulation, as well as leading with their own fleet to scale up electrification of vehicles in municipalities and supporting residents in purchasing and installing the infrastructure needed to support that. So that should be coming in the next few months. Like I said, we're working on heavy duty electrification, education, and hopefully engaging with DOT and other fleets to bring some demo vehicles. We're partnering with Vermont and New Hampshire on that as well. On the transit side, GPCOG has put out Transit Tomorrow, which is a long-range transit plan that is looking at making transit easier. And then Transit Together is a new initiative in which we're looking at the regional network redesign and trying to improve and reimagine the transit connections between the different transit options in our region. and hopefully bringing a lot of data and analysis and trying to improve the experience that people have when switching in between different transit options. We're also doing a rapid transit analysis, which was started with Transit Tomorrow, looking at opportunities to introduce rapid transit corridors into the region. And we have some additional regional complete streets, which, looking at making streets safer, bringing in bike and pedestrian components into that, and then also a regional traffic management system that can ease congestion, reduce emissions. So these are kind of some of the activities and ways in which GPCOG is looking to support and be a leader in the region on strategies that can support the Climate Action Plan. So we're excited and looking to engage with anybody who's interested. I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, Sara, and we will turn it over to Jean.
Thank you, Heather, and thanks to MPHA for putting this together, and thanks to everyone who's joined us. And I also want to give a shout out to the Maine Climate Council and the Transportation Working Group and everyone who really contributed to that process. So the Bicycle Coalition of Maine is a statewide nonprofit dedicated to making Maine a better and safer place to bike and walk. We are part of the Transportation Working Group, and we're so very excited that Maine is tackling the issue of climate change. I appreciate Joyce calling out the bike ped as a key strategy to that plan. Because investing in bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure must be part of our climate action plan, and we encourage our policymakers to make an investment in biking and walking. Over the past year, during the pandemic, we have seen an exponential increase in the number of people biking, walking, hiking, overall enjoying Maine's outdoors, and we really want and need to keep this trend going, and investing in biking and pedestrian facilities will be critical. As we all know, biking and walking are emissions-free forms of travel, and investing in sidewalks, bike facilities, expanded transit, are practical, inclusive, effective, and fundable strategies that will both reduce emissions and help to transform transportation culture here in Maine. Investments will result in reduced vehicle miles traveled and their associated emissions, better air quality, improved health for Mainers. In fact, just a 15-minute walk or bike ride to work for a total of 30 minutes a day would be sufficient to meet the CDC's recommended physical activity guidelines. And proximity to trails is associated with people being 50% more likely to meet physical activity guidelines and 80% more likely to use a bicycle. And I would also say it really helps to foster trust within a community, promoting equity, building social interactions, and developing a shared sense of identity among people who live there. I know for me, biking, my favorite part of biking and walking is connecting with the community. You meet people along the way, you pop into that new shop, or you find a park that you didn't even know was there. And you really connect so directly in a way on a bike and a foot that you can't in a car. And we also know we can do this. Developing or improving biking and walking facilities can be done relatively quickly and at low costs. So as we work towards these big, longer term and critical goals of electrification of vehicles and that transition to renewable energy sources, we can get some early successes in the transportation sector with investments in biking and walking. We already know how to build this infrastructure, so we simply need to scale it up. And we also know investments to replace particularly that last mile or last few miles of a trip really work. So let's start in our city and village centers. More than half of all trips in the United States are within a 20-minute bike ride or less, and more than 1 in 4 trips are within a 20-minute walk or less. And these short trips can really add up. So nationally, if we replace 50% of driving trips less than 1 mile with biking or walking, that would result in avoiding 21 billion miles driven. And investments have shown that time and time again, they are also a boost to the economy. And for those with disabilities or for low-income houses, the ability to walk or use transit to get to work can mean economic independence and preservation of their livelihood. Active transportation is also used as a key strategy to attract corporate businesses looking to relocate and attract young, talented workers. And study after study has shown that trails attract visitors and bring revenue to small town and rural America. And we all know outdoor tourism is a cornerstone of Maine's economy. So in order to be successful, we need to include some vital components. And the first and foremost is safety. Our roads are not currently very safe for pedestrians, people on bikes, and other vulnerable users. Nationally, between 2008 and 2017, on average, 13 individuals were struck and killed while walking on the streets every day. That's one person killed every hour and 46 minutes. And these rates are up from 35% from a decade ago. And here in Maine, about 36% of the bike and pedestrian fatalities on local roads were directly attributable to speed. So the importance of our safer streets also doesn't only apply to vulnerable users. In 2020, just last year, all road users in Maine were more at risk. More Mainers died from fatal crashes in 2020 than 2019, even with less traffic amid the coronavirus pandemic. And we hear this from people all across the state. The primary reason they are cautious to switch to biking and walking for their trips is due to real and perceived safety risks, primarily associated with speeding cars and lack of off-road and protected facilities. So as we make investments in biking and walking and the transition to electric vehicles and transportation or transit increasing, we must also combine these efforts to ensure our roads are safer for all users. Another reason for caution around biking and walking include a lack of connectivity. We need to connect people where they are to where they want to go. And across all these components, we must center equity. For too long, low-income and Black and Brown communities have been ignored in conversations about access to trails, transit, biking, and walking facilities. So we must embark on a conscious and coordinated effort to promote equitable trail and other active transportation infrastructure development. So I'll just sum up real quick as we embark on our ambitious but critical and doable climate action plan. Let's make sure biking and walking get the investments they need to improve public health, boost the economy, and enliven our communities. So thanks, Heather.
Thank you, Jean. We really appreciate that presentation. And now we'll turn it over to Todd for our policy solutions portion.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Todd Martin. I'm the Grassroots Outreach Coordinator at the Natural Resources Council of Maine. NRCM is a nonprofit environmental organization based in Augusta. We were founded in 1959, so more than 60 years ago, and we have 25,000 members here in Maine and beyond that support our work to protect Maine's environment. And until recently, I was a board member with Maine Public Health Association, so I'm happy to be here today. So I'm here to speak about some of the policy solutions, some legislation that we need to implement through the legislature this year in order to adopt the transportation recommendations of the Climate Action Plan. So as most of us know, the legislature is off to a bit of a slow start, adapting to meeting virtually via Zoom. And so much of the legislation I'm going to speak about has not yet been printed, but should be in the next few weeks. So I want to highlight just a couple of policy solutions that can help meet these transportation recommendations of the climate plan. So first, I'll start with an issue that has broad bipartisan support, which is expanding broadband, which we've heard here on the webinar this morning from several of our panelists. Expanding broadband was a key recommendation of the transportation recommendations. In order to reduce vehicle miles traveled, the climate plan set an ambitious but achievable goal of deploying high-speed broadband to 95% of Maine homes by 2025 and 99% of Maine homes by 2030. And in her State of the Budget address last week, Governor Mills announced a $30 million bond to help Maine build back better from the COVID pandemic and to expand broadband. Other lawmakers might come forward with a more aggressive bond funding proposal. But as we all know, expanding opportunities for more Mainers to work and learn from home with high-speed internet can both reduce traffic on our roads, it can save Mainers money on fuel and car repair, it can reduce carbon pollution in the air, and promote public health by reducing air pollution from our tailpipes. So it's really encouraging to hear that there's bipartisan support in the legislature this year for a broadband bond, and we're hoping the legislature will act aggressively. The second policy solution I want to highlight is a clean transportation roadmap. So a key recommendation of the transportation section of the climate plan was to aggressively increase the number of electric vehicles on the road here in Maine to 41,000 EVs by 2025, that's just 4 years away, and 219,000 EVs by 2030. By comparison, we have about 4,000 EVs on the road here in Maine today. That's less than 1% of cars on the road in Maine. So to get to these goals, the Climate Action Plan proposes to develop a clean transportation roadmap. by 2022, so to put it together this year, to identify the policies, the programs, and the regulatory changes that we need to meet these aggressive goals. We're hearing that the governor will soon announce an executive order to establish a task force to develop this clean transportation roadmap. And it will include not just how we get to 41,000 EVs in the next 4 years, but also how we build out the charging infrastructure that we need to support those vehicles, which Sara spoke about in her presentation. The good news is that the cost of electric vehicles is coming down rapidly, and at the same time, battery ranges are growing exponentially. There are more available electric vehicle models available on the market today than ever before. As Joyce alluded to, several companies have announced that they're going to only sell EVs by 2030, 2035, including General Motors and Volvo, which is really exciting. So in addition to the federal rebates that are currently available for electric vehicles, Efficiency Maine also has state-based rebates for Maine residents. And earlier this year, Efficiency Maine launched new rebates for electric vehicles for low-income residents, for municipalities, and for tribal governments. And the one that I'm really excited about is they announced a new rebate for used electric vehicles, which as more people buy new EVs, the market for used EVs is only going to increase. So those rebates are really helpful to get us to those EV goals. The next one I wanted to highlight is the financing solution and a Maine Clean Energy Accelerator, or a green bank. So as we all know, financing is essential to rapid, equitable deployment of climate solutions, including clean transportation. Green banks are a proven solution that make it easier to finance clean energy, energy efficiency, and climate resilience by standardizing the process, reducing risk for local lenders, and lowering interest rates, and leveraging both public and private investments. So modeled after green banks in other states, including Connecticut, which has a very successful green bank, a Maine green bank or a clean energy accelerator would help low and moderate income Mainers get low interest loans for clean energy, weatherization, and transportation projects. One example is that a Maine business could get a low interest loan through the Maine Clean Energy Accelerator to install a workplace electric vehicle charging station at their workplace. Just one example. We're hearing that the Biden administration might soon pass legislation that would provide billions in seed money for state green banks all around the country. And so this year, we hope the legislature will act to adopt a bill to establish a Maine green bank, so that Maine is prepared to receive those federal dollars without having to commit state funding. The last one I want to highlight, as Jean alluded to, not all the solutions, the transportation solutions to climate change need to be motorized. We need to think about and prioritize non-motorized solutions, including biking and walking, and making biking and walking safe and accessible to Maine people from York to Aroostook County. So this session, one bill I want to highlight is LD 669. It's sponsored by Representative Victoria Morales, and the title is an act to ensure public ways are compliant with the Federal Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. This bill would require Maine DOT and municipalities to do a better job of making sure that sidewalks and crossings hit a higher standard that work for all users. So crosswalks and sidewalks throughout Maine are often in poor condition, with broken surfaces that are difficult, especially for wheelchairs, to navigate, and often do not comply with the American with Disabilities Act. So bringing sidewalks and crosswalks up to ADA compliance makes our sidewalks and our bike ped infrastructure accessible to everyone. So this bill has been printed. Again, it's LD 669. The public hearing has not yet been scheduled, but this is an important bill to make sure that our biking and walking infrastructure is safe and accessible to everyone. So those are the policy solutions I want to highlight, and I'll turn it back over to Heather.
Thank you so much, Todd, and really to all of our panelists for being here, talking about the work you're doing in your organizations and all offering policy solutions for how we can move this work forward. I really love that you all also touched on equity. And in terms of that and the EV program that many of you mentioned, specifically around the rebates, can you talk a little bit more about how you'll track uptake of the rebate program, especially among low income populations, so we can actually see who's taking advantage of it?
Efficiency Maine has been tracking that if people submit for the rebate. And so they have that information. And they, I can say that there's also sort of an informal group, including the governor's office, the Office of Energy, DOT, DEP, Efficiency Maine. And we've been meeting on how to put forward, education to get people into EVs. How do we lead by example at the state? What are we going to do in terms of policy around the roadmap that Todd spoke about? So I think that in terms of equity, that's definitely a conversation that's going on. Again, we've hired UMaine to really, what I call it, the equity and electrification paper, and to really help us understand how we get people, frankly, who can't get a loan, who probably buy a car using Uncle Henry's, if you know what that is, right? How do we get them into a used electric vehicle or a better efficient vehicle? So Efficiency Maine right now is really the key. They're really the keepers of a lot of the information.
They are, and actually, Heather, if I could share my screen, I actually have a map that Efficiency Maine put together. Heather, can you allow participant screen sharing?
Yep.
What I'm going to share is a map that Efficiency Maine shared in a webinar last fall, so the data is a little bit outdated, but just to demonstrate, if I can find the window to share, just to demonstrate the popularity of their EV rebate program. So again, this map is from last fall, so it's a little bit outdated, but between the end of August of 2019 and in October of 2020, Efficiency Maine gave out 675 EV rebates in total. That's both for all electric and for hybrid electric vehicles. As you can see, there's pretty good geographic distribution as well. This is only going to increase because of the increased rebates that I mentioned for low-income nonprofits, municipal and tribal governments, and the used EV rebate program. I think this is a great starting point, but we're only going to see more rebates from Efficiency Maine in the coming months and years.
Thank you. And we have about 1 more minute left, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So just one final question that maybe we can answer in the 30 seconds we have. We all know as we come out of winter that our roads need a lot of repair. How easy, and hopefully someone on the panel knows, is it to integrate bike lanes and more sidewalks, especially in rural areas, as we repave roads and do that construction work going into the spring?
I guess that might be me. It's actually not easy. It's not as easy as slapping an extra foot of pavement on or a couple feet of pavement. The pavement in some ways is the relatively inexpensive piece of that. When you're adding, you have to have gravel. You have to build the road. Otherwise, the pavement's just going to break away, and you've wasted that investment. In town, typically to build sidewalks, the sidewalk again isn't the expensive piece, but you have to have drainage. Where you have sidewalks, you typically have what we call closed drainage, which means you're going to have the manholes and the drains, and that's expensive. That said, it is part of our system, and Jean said it very well. People are dying, and that's not okay. They're very vulnerable when they're hit by a speeding car, and we are really looking at how do we keep all of the users safe. And I think we actually have somebody now who only does ADA on construction projects, for example. Her job is to make sure anything we put out is meeting American Disabilities Act and looking at the safety of sidewalks and what can we do, and really looking You know, the other thing is we have what's called a Heads Up campaign, and we've worked with 21 communities with BCM at the table with us, trying to identify where do people want to cross the street? Do we need to put a crosswalk there if that's where they want to cross? And so I think it's not an easy, cheap thing to talk about, but it's something we have to really look at it and do more of, and we know that.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add to that question?
I'll just say, I mean, I echo a lot what Joyce said, and you know, this is challenging, so let's take it as it comes. And I think the Heads Up program is great to identify places people really want improvements. And then when we're at a place where we are fixing a road or rebuilding it some way, that's the point to stop, ask lots of questions, figure out how to make it safe for everybody and make those improvements. So we do that sort of as things move along, but always having that public engagement part of it, and asking ourselves the tough questions about how to make this safer and what the trade-offs are, I think is critical.
Thank you. And I know we're over time, so I want to be mindful if folks need to hop off, but we do have one last question I'd like to get to. So again, if you need to jump off, please do, and we'll send out the recording. But the last question is whether or not there's been any discussion about raising the gas tax in the hopes that that would drive conversion.
So literally right before the pandemic hit, there was a Blue Ribbon Commission set up to look at transportation funding. And really, there was no conclusions that came out of that. The Transportation Working Group, you know, we talked a lot about it, and what I think we all agreed on is there can't be an us versus them anymore. It can't, you know, we have to join forces to fund all of the things that we want to do. And you know, there can't be a left and a right, if you will. We have to see the benefit of going together. And that is conversation. It's a tough conversation. We haven't had a gas tax raise in a very long time. You know, we're going to have a conversation around it, especially as people drive less, as people have electric vehicles. One thing that I keep saying is, you still need safe bridges and roads for electric vehicles. I can tell you a big part of my job is posting and closing bridges on a monthly basis. And we are basically managing in a competent manner the decline of our system right now. We are strategically letting bridges get posted rather than work on them because we just don't have the money. And that is a reality we have. So as a state, we all have to get our heads together and think about, you know, how we're going to solve this.
One of the funding sources I just want to mention too is an initiative that's being proposed in the Northeast called the Transportation and Climate Initiative. It's an effort that's very similar to the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI, whereby power plants are paying to emit carbon essentially, and the money that is raised goes back to participating states to invest in weatherization and reducing carbon emissions. The Transportation and Climate Initiative could provide millions in funding to Maine, and it would increase the gas tax in Maine, but it would fund many of these important programs that we're talking about this morning to ramp up electric vehicle adoption, increase bike ped infrastructure. So it's a solution that's out there. It's in the very early stages of planning. But Maine is paying attention and is part of those discussions, but that's one of the possible funding sources out there.
Great, thank you. And thank you, and to everyone in the audience for staying with us for the extra 5 minutes to get to that question. If anyone has questions after we sign off this morning, please feel free to send them my way and we'll do our best to get them answered. We'll follow up with a recording of today. And I really just want to thank our panelists for being here and talking about this very important issue as we work to improve the climate and enhance public health at the same time. Thank you too for our legislators for taking time to jump on today's call. If anyone has any questions, please be in touch and enjoy the rest of your morning. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks, everyone.